"Mom, this is for the best. You'll thank me later." Those were my son's words on Christmas Eve, his hand patting mine with the false gentleness of someone delivering betrayal disguised as kindness. I was 71 years old, dressed, in my best red sweater, a plate of ginger cookies cooling back at home, and instead of sharing Christmas dinner with family, I found myself sitting in the lobby of a nursing home that smelled faintly of bleach and despair. The snow outside swirled, against the windows, thick and heavy, muffling the world in white silence. But inside, the silence was of another kind. The silence of abandonment. I stared at David, my only child, the boy I had carried for 9 months, the boy I had nursed through sickness, the boy whose school plays I never missed. And now that same boy, now a grown man with lines of stress across his forehead, was sliding a clipboard toward the receptionist as though checking me in at a hotel. "I thought we were just visiting," I whispered, my voice trembling. David avoided my eyes. "It's temporary, just until we figure things out." Figure things out. Words that sounded practical, reasonable, even merciful, until you felt the weight of the suitcase at your feet, packed by hands that weren't your own. I looked down at the frayed leather handle of that suitcase. Inside were the pieces of my life he had deemed sufficient to take with me. A few cardigans, my Bible, a photograph of his father. Everything else, decades of sacrifice, memories, heirlooms, remained in the house I had worked my whole life to protect. "David," I said, my throat dry. "You can't just leave me here." His jaw tightened. "I don't have a choice, Mom. You're not. You can't take care of yourself anymore. Rebecca and I." He stopped, then sighed. "It's just better this way. Rebecca," my daughter-in-law, the woman who wrinkled her nose at my cooking, who sighed when I asked for help carrying groceries, who once called me old baggage under her breath. I had brushed it off at the time, not wanting to cause trouble. Now I wondered if she had been planning this moment all along. The receptionist smiled politely, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "We'll make sure she's comfortable, sir. You can fill out the rest of the paperwork in the office." David nodded, his relief visible, as though he had just unloaded a burden. I wanted to scream, to pound the desk, to drag my suitcase back out into the snow. But my body betrayed me. My legs felt weak, my voice caught in my throat. My hands trembled too much to hold on to anything. So instead, I sat quietly in the vinyl chair they offered me, the Christmas wreath on the wall mocking me with its cheer. The key. First night was the worst. I lay in a narrow bed, the sheets stiff and tucked too tightly, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing in the hallway. Down the corridor, someone cried out, a deep, aching sound that pierced the stillness. I clutched my pillow and whispered, "I don't belong here." Memories flooded in. Christmases passed when Mark, my late husband, strung lights across the porch, when David tore open presents with wide-eyed glee, when the house smelled of cinnamon and pine. That house had been my pride, my fortress, my legacy. Now, it was slipping through my fingers. The next morning, I asked the nurse how long I was staying. She gave me a kind but vague smile. "As long as your family decides, dear." My family. My son. The boy I raised alone after his father passed. The boy I had worked double shifts for, who I had sacrificed new shoes for so he could have books, who I had shielded from every storm I could, and he had left me here. On Christmas. I tried to settle in, to make sense of the days. The staff was kind, but busy. Meals were bland. Conversations with other residents were brief and heavy with their own sorrow. I knitted in the common room, read my Bible, tried to keep the fire of dignity burning in my chest. But every time the phone rang, at the nurse's station, every time the doors slid open with a visitor, I hoped it was David. That he had realized his mistake. That he had come to take me home. Weeks passed. He didn't come. When he finally visited, it was February. He arrived in a rush, his tie askew, Rebecca waiting in the car. "I can't stay long," he said, kissing my cheek distractedly. I looked into his eyes, searching for the boy I once knew. Instead, I saw a man weighed down by something. Stress, yes, but also guilt. "David," I whispered, "why did you do this?" He shifted uncomfortably. "You need care, Mom. More than I can give. And the house, it's too much for you to handle. The house, my sanctuary. What about it?" I asked, my chest tightening. He hesitated, then sighed. "Rebecca and we're making changes, renovating. It'll be better for all of us in the long run." Renovating. A polite word for erasing. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Instead, I nodded. "I see." When he left that day, I sat in the common room with my knitting untouched in my lap. My heart hardened like ice, because I understood then. This wasn't about care. It wasn't about my well-being. It was about the house. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the lights. My son had abandoned me, my daughter-in-law had pushed me aside, and my home, the one I had worked and bled for, was slipping into their greedy hands. But as I lay there, something else stirred inside me. Not despair, not grief. Resolve. They thought I was powerless. That age had softened me, that neglect had broken me, that betrayal had silenced me. They were wrong, because I still had my mind. I still had my memories. I still had the strength that comes from decades of survival, and I would use every ounce of it. One day, I vowed, my son would walk into that house and realize the truth. It was not his. It never would be, because I was already weaving the plan that would make him tenant to his own mother. And when the time came, he would learn the hardest lesson of his life. The days in the nursing home blurred together, each one marked by routine. Breakfast at 8, lukewarm oatmeal, sometimes toast, morning activities, bingo, chair yoga, crafts meant to distract fading minds, lunch at noon, dinner at 5, lights out at 9. I moved through it all like a ghost, my body present, but my spirit restless. Most of the other residents had families who came to visit often. Daughters brought flowers, grandchildren laughed and played cards, sons helped fathers down the hallway. I watched them all with a hollow ache in my chest. David rarely came. When he did, his visits were brief, his eyes always on the clock. He talked about work, about how stressful things are with the renovations, about how Rebecca was managing things at home. He never asked how I was, never asked what I needed. Once, I tried. "David," I whispered during one of his hurried visits, "could you bring me my sewing basket? I left it in the closet." He shifted uncomfortably. "I'll see what I can do." Weeks passed. The basket never came. I realized then that it wasn't forgetfulness. It was indifference. Rebecca, of course, never visited, but her presence reached me in other ways. One afternoon, David brought photos on his phone. "Look," he said, scrolling through pictures. "We've made so much progress. The kitchen is completely redone. Open concept, just like Rebecca wanted." Stared at the glowing screen, at the shiny granite counters and the sleek cabinets that replaced the oak ones Mark had built with his own hands. My fingers twitched, remembering the feel of sawdust on our skin, the pride in his eyes as he tightened the final hinge. "Doesn't it look great?" David asked, smiling. I forced a nod. "Beautiful." But inside, I felt something splinter. That kitchen wasn't just a room. It was where I had taught David to stir cookie batter, where I had whispered prayers over simmering pots of stew, where I had kissed Mark goodnight over mugs of tea. And now it was a stranger's showroom. Rebecca's showroom. I began to listen more in the common room. The nurses chatted as they passed, assuming we couldn't hear or understand. One afternoon, I caught fragments of conversation that froze my blood. She's in here permanently? Her son signed the paperwork. Yes. Power of attorney. 2. Oh, so he controls the property then? Exactly. Young wife must be thrilled. My hands clenched around the arm of my chair. Power of attorney. He hadn't mentioned that. He hadn't told me he now controlled decisions about my life, my house, my everything. I excused myself, retreating to my room, my mind spinning. So that was the truth. Not just abandonment, not just neglect, but betrayal sealed with signatures for days. I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts a storm. They thought I was powerless. But I had lived long enough to know that paperwork, like people, could be undone. One small mercy of the nursing home was the library, just a single room with shelves of donated books, magazines, and old newspapers. I spent hours there, not for the stories, but for the silence. And it was there, tucked in a corner, that I found the law books. Thin guides, outdated perhaps, but enough to spark something inside me. I began reading about wills, estates, tenants, rights. The language was heavy, the words unfamiliar, but I persisted. My mind, though aged, was still sharp when I fed it purpose. The more I read, the more I realized they had underestimated me. They thought I would knit and nap and fade quietly. But I was learning. I was preparing. In March, David visited again. He looked tired, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes shadowed. "How's everything, Mom?" he asked half-heartedly. I smiled faintly. "Oh, you know, I keep busy." Good, he muttered. He pulled out a folder. "I just need you to sign a few more papers. Routine stuff. Insurance, mostly." He slid the forms across the table in the visitor's lounge. Picked up the pen, my hand trembling slightly. Not from weakness, but from the effort of restraint. "Of course," I said softly. But instead of signing, I adjusted my glasses and began to read. Line by line, word by word. David shifted in his seat. "Mom, you don't have to—" "I insist," I interrupted. The words were dense, but I saw enough. Transfers, permissions, more power sliding into his hands. I set the pen down. "I'll need more time." He frowned. "Mom, it's just paperwork. Trust me." I met his eyes, steady and unblinking. "I trusted you once." His face flushed. He shoved the papers back into the folder. "Fine, I'll bring them another— When he left, I wrote in my small notebook, one I had begun keeping hidden beneath my mattress. March 12th. David tried again. Papers. More power. I refused. That notebook became my lifeline. I wrote everything. Every visit. Every word. Every detail. Each entry was a brick in the wall I was building, one that would shield me when the time came. Not all the residents in the nursing home were lost in their own worlds. One woman, Agnes, had sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She had been a teacher once, and though her body was frail, her mind was quick. "You're not like the others," she said one afternoon as we knitted side by side. "What do you mean?" I asked. She smirked. "You're not defeated. I can see it in your eyes. You're planning something." I chuckled softly. "Maybe I am." Agnes leaned closer. "Good. Let them think we're old and harmless. That's our weapon. They never see it coming." Her words lit something in me. She was right. Age was not a weakness. It was camouflage. Spring came, though I barely noticed. The days lengthened, the snow melted, the world outside moved on without me. But inside, my plan grew. Roots. I wrote letters, carefully, secretly. I contacted an old friend of Mark's, a man named Harold who had once been our banker. I asked questions, sought advice. pieced together the puzzle of what David had done. Harold's reply, when it came, confirmed my suspicions. "Be cautious," he wrote. "Power of attorney can be challenged if you were coerced. Keep records. Keep witnesses." I folded the letter and tucked it into my notebook. My heart pounded, but with triumph this time. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. I had been betrayed, but I wasn't powerless. One evening, as I sat in the common room, a volunteer pianist played old Christmas carols on the piano. My throat tightened as Silent Night drifted through the air, memories crashing over me. I remembered the last Christmas at home, how I had set the table with care, how I had lit the candles, how Rebecca had rolled her eyes at my old-fashioned decorations. And then I remembered the sting of that lobby, the suitcase at my feet, the look in David's eyes as he left me behind. I clenched my hands together and whispered a vow beneath the music. They will regret this. Not in anger, not in rashness, but in justice. By summer, David visited less often. Rebecca never came. The staff grew used to me spending hours in the library, scribbling in my notebook. They thought I was writing letters to family. They didn't know I was drafting the foundation of my revenge, because one day I would leave this place. And when I did, I wouldn't just return home. I would return with power. I would return with the truth. And I would make my son realize that by signing me away, he had signed his own downfall. The smell of disinfectant clung to everything in the nursing home, no matter how many flowers volunteers brought to the front desk. I had grown used to it. But one afternoon when David walked in, he wrinkled his nose. "I don't know how you stand it here," he muttered. The words stung, not because they weren't true, but because he had put me here. And yet he spoke as if I had chosen this exile. "Neither do I," said quietly. He shifted in his chair, his tie loose, his hair damp with sweat. "Listen. Rebecca wanted me to tell you that the renovations are almost done. We're turning the study into a home office. She's been working so hard on it." I blinked. The study. Mark's study. The room where he had built his model trains, where he had read the newspaper every morning, where his scent had lingered for months after his death. "She's painting over his walls?" I whispered. David gave a tired shrug. "It's been years, Mom. Things change. Things change." The casual cruelty of the phrase made my heart ache. That evening, I sat in the library with my notebook. I wrote in block letters, April 4th. David told me they are taking Mark's study. Painting over it, erasing him. I underlined the words until the paper nearly tore. Then I whispered into the quiet, "Not if I erase them first." Rebecca's voice arrived in phone calls that David took too close to my chair. "No, she doesn't. Need to know." "Yes, the deed is sorted. Don't worry. Just sign it. She won't ask questions." One afternoon, he excused himself to the hallway but left his folder behind. I glanced down, my heart thudding. Inside were printouts, property tax updates, mortgage statements. My name was still there, bold at the top, but scribbled notes in. Rebecca's hand danced along the margins. Soon ours. Sell? Flip quickly. I snapped the folder shut before he returned, my pulse hammering. So that was her plan. Not just to live in the house, but to take it, profit from it, erase every trace of me and Mark. That night, I prayed, not for her mercy, but for my strength. And then I vowed again. She would choke on the word ours. Summer came. The heat seeped through the walls of the nursing home, and fans hummed endlessly. I spent most afternoons in the garden out back, tending the roses with brittle gloves. One day, as I knelt in the dirt, a young volunteer bent down beside me. "Your son brought new photos," she said kindly. "Want to see?" I hesitated, then nodded. The pictures on her phone showed Rebecca posing in my living room, champagne glass in hand. The rug was new, the curtains replaced, my grandmother's cabinet missing. In one shot, she stood with friends, her hand possessively on the mantle that once held my family Bible. I studied Rebecca's smile, sharp, victorious, smug. The volunteer thought I was admiring the decor. "Isn't it lovely?" she asked. "Yes," I murmured. But my hands tightened on the gloves until the leather squeaked. Lovely like poison. Lovely like betrayal. Lovely like the moment before collapse. That night, I did not sleep. Instead, I pulled out the letter Harold had sent. The one warning me about power of attorney. His words echoed in my mind. Be cautious. Keep records. Keep witnesses. So I began to recruit. Quietly. Agnes became my first ally. I showed her my notebook one afternoon in the garden, flipping through the careful entries. She nodded slowly, her sharp eyes narrowing. "They'll regret underestimating you," she said. "Will you stand with me if I need you?" I asked softly. "Of course," she said without hesitation. A second ally came in the form of a young nurse named Linda. She had a kind face and a habit of lingering when David visited. Once, after he left, she approached me. "He doesn't treat you very kindly, does he?" she whispered. I smiled sadly. "He forgets I'm his mother." Linda hesitated, then leaned closer. "If you ever need a witness, someone to confirm what's happening, I'll help." I touched her hand gratefully. Another brick in my wall. By August, my notebook was thick with entries. Every insult, every neglect, every hint of betrayal, documented with dates and times. I even began slipping in phrases David and Rebecca used when they thought I wasn't listening. Dead weight. Old-fashioned baggage. She'll be gone soon. Each word was a nail, and I was building their coffin with them. Rebecca finally visited in person in September. The staff was surprised. They had never seen her before. She swept in wearing perfume that clung to the walls, her heels clicking. Loudly against the floor, "Mother," she said, as though the word tasted bitter. "You look comfortable." I rose slowly from my chair, my cane steady in my hand. "Comfort isn't the word I'd choose." She smirked. "Isn't it? David and I are making it beautiful again. You should be grateful." "Grateful." I repeated softly. "Yes. We're giving it new life." My jaw tightened. "That place was my life, my husband's life. You didn't build it." Her eyes narrowed. "You're old, Mother. Things change. Get used to it." She turned, her heels sharp against the floor, and left without another word. I sank back into my chair, my body trembling. But not from weakness. From rage. That night, I wrote in my notebook, September 14th. Rebecca came. Called me old, erased. My life. She will regret this. The weeks that followed, I sharpened my plan. I spoke more with Harold by letter, carefully phrased so no one else could understand. I began asking Linda to quietly note the times David tried to push me into signing, and I started something else too. Little acts of psychological warfare. When David brought me more papers, I smiled sweetly and said, "Of course, dear. But shouldn't Rebecca sign first since she wants it so badly?" He blinked, caught off guard. "That's not—" I cut him off gently. "It must be exhausting, David. Always cleaning up after her, always protecting her from mistakes. I do hope she appreciates it." His mouth opened, then closed. He stuffed the papers back into his folder and left quickly. Later that night, I overheard him arguing with Rebecca in the hallway. "She's stalling," he hissed. "She knows something." "Then make her sign," Rebecca snapped. "I'm trying." I smiled in the dark, rocking slowly in my chair. Their cracks were widening, and I was the wedge. October arrived, the air crisp, leaves falling like fire. the nursing home decorated with pumpkins. And yet, I waited. Patience was my greatest weapon. Let them believe they were winning. Let them celebrate in my home, toast with their champagne, sleep in beds bought with my money. Because one day soon, they would come to me, papers in hand, demanding the final signature. And that was the day the trap would snap shut. On Halloween, children from the local school visited the nursing home in costumes. I sat in the corner, handing out candy, watching their laughter fill the halls. One little girl, dressed as an angel, leaned close and whispered, "Are you sad, Grandma?" I smiled gently. "Not sad, child. Just waiting." Waiting for what? For justice! She skipped away, her wings fluttering, and I sat back, the candy bowl heavy in my lap, my heart steady. Because justice was coming. Not loud, not rushed, but sure. And when it came, it would taste sweeter than any candy. November arrived, with a sharp chill in the air. The nursing home staff put up paper turkeys and orange garlands in the halls, but the decorations only deepened the ache in my chest. Holidays had always meant warmth, family, food filling the kitchen. Now, the smell of reheated turkey and boxed stuffing filled the cafeteria, and I sat among strangers who barely remembered their own names. David visited just before Thanksgiving, his face drawn, his voice clipped. "Mom, we need to settle some things before the end of the year," he said. "Settle?" I asked, my knitting needles still in my lap. He pulled out another folder. The utilities, property taxes, inheritance adjustments. Rebecca and I can't keep covering everything. We need you to what? I cut in softly. His jaw worked. To sign, Mom. To make this easier for everyone. For everyone. I studied his face, the twitch at his temple, the impatience in his eyes. He wasn't doing this for me. He was doing it for Rebecca, for the gleaming vision she had of my home stripped of everything that made it mine. I set my needles down. "David, do you remember the Thanksgiving your father carved the turkey with the dull knife, and it slipped?" He blinked. "What?" He laughed. You laughed. The whole table laughed. We ate late that night, but it was the happiest meal I can remember. That house holds those memories, David. Not just walls, not just bills. He shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, times change. We need to be practical." I met his eyes steadily. Practicality without heart is cruelty. He sighed heavily, stuffing the papers back into his folder. "I don't have time for this." When he left, Linda the nurse slipped into the lounge, her eyes sharp. "He's pushing again?" "Yes," I whispered. "And this time I think he's desperate." "Good," she said. "Desperation makes people sloppy." Rebecca came in. Person 2 weeks later, her perfume choking the narrow hallway as she swept toward my room. She didn't bother to sit, just leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Still holding on, I see," she said coolly. I folded my knitting carefully. "To what?" she smirked. "To relevance. To dignity. To that house. It's only a matter of time, you know." Her arrogance was like a slap, but I kept my face calm, my voice steady. "Time has always been my ally, Rebecca, not yours." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you're clever? You're not. You're old. Weak. Forgotten." I tilted my head. "If I'm forgotten, why are you standing here wasting your breath?" She flushed crimson, her lips pressed thin. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stalked away, her heels clicking like gunshots down the hall. Agnes, sitting nearby, chuckled dryly. "You hit a nerve." "Yes," I whispered, "and nerves fray when tugged." I began writing more letters. This time not only to Harold, but to a lawyer recommended by the pastor who occasionally visited the home. I explained my situation, carefully, detailing the coercion, the pressure, the power of attorney that had been pushed onto me. The lawyer responded swiftly. If you were placed under duress, the document can be challenged. Begin gathering witness statements. Every record you've kept is invaluable. Do not sign anything further. I pressed the letter to my chest, my heart pounding. Proof, validation, hope. That night, I pulled out my notebook and added a final section. At the back, witnesses. I wrote down Agnes's name, Linda's, even the pastor's, people who had seen enough to confirm the truth. Thanksgiving at the home was pitiful. Lukewarm gravy, instant potatoes, a slice of pumpkin pie that tasted more of cardboard than spice. I sat with Agnes, who made jokes about the cranberry sauce wobbling like a dying jellyfish. But all I could think about was the laughter echoing in my real dining room, the smell of roasted turkey, the sound of Mark's voice leading Grace. And then I thought of Rebecca, sitting smugly at my table, glass raised, toasting her own conquest. I gripped my fork until my knuckles whitened and whispered under my breath, "Enjoy it while you can." December came. Snow fell thick outside, covering the town in white silence. The nursing home staff put up a plastic tree with blinking lights. They sang carols in the hallways. On Christmas Eve, I sat by the window, staring at the snow, my heart aching with memory. 1 year ago to the day, David had left me here. 1 year since the betrayal that shattered everything. I whispered to Mark's memory, "It won't be in vain, I promise." The next morning, Christmas Day, David arrived. His face was tense, his tone brisk. "Mom, we're hosting a Christmas dinner tonight at the house. I thought maybe you could come for a few hours." I blinked, surprised. "To the house?" "Yes. Rebecca thinks it's important you see all the work we've done. It'll be good for everyone. Good for everyone. Or good for them. Parading their conquest," but I nodded. "Of course, David. I'd love to." Linda wheeled me out to the car later, her hand squeezing mine. "Remember," she whispered. "Observe. Document. Let them think you're weak. That's how you win." I nodded, my pulse quickening. When I stepped through the front door of my house, the warmth hit me first. The smell of pine, cinnamon, and roast. For a moment, my knees buckled with memory. But then my eyes adjusted, and I saw what they had done. The walls painted stark white, the old rugs replaced with cold hardwood. My curtains gone, my furniture sold. Rebecca stood in the kitchen, her champagne glass raised, wearing a dress that shimmered under the lights. "Merry Christmas, Mother," she said sweetly, though her eyes glittered with triumph. I forced a smile. "Merry Christmas." David hovered beside her, looking uneasy. I sat quietly through dinner, barely touching the food. Rebecca laughed loudly. Her friends gushed about the new design, the modern touches. My house, my sanctuary, turned into their trophy. One point, Rebecca leaned close and whispered so only I could hear, "See how beautiful it is without your clutter?" I looked at her calmly. "Clutter can be cleared, but rot? That eats the foundation." Her smile faltered. That night, back at the nursing home, I pulled out my notebook and wrote until my hand ached. I detailed every word, every insult, every observation, and then I added a new vow. Next Christmas, it will be me hosting, and they will come as guests, tenants in the house they tried to steal. I closed the notebook, slid it under my pillow, and whispered into the dark. 1 year. That's all. 1 year, and the tables will turn. The new year began with sleet and gray skies. The nursing home halls were stripped of holiday decorations, leaving them bare and clinical once more. But inside me, something new had taken root. Certainty. I no longer drifted like a ghost. Every day now carried purpose. David visited less often after Christmas. Perhaps he sensed my disapproval, Or perhaps Rebecca kept him busy parading their new modern home to friends. Either way, his absence gave me space to strengthen my plans. I met with the lawyer recommended by the pastor. We sat across from each other in a quiet office, the smell of ink and old books filling the room. "You've documented everything?" he asked. I slid my notebook across the desk. He flipped through the pages, his eyebrows raising with each entry. "This is meticulous," he said. "Dates, times, witnesses. You've been thorough." I straightened my back. They thought I was fading. They thought I wouldn't notice. But I notice everything. He nodded. "We can challenge the power of attorney. If you were coerced, if you weren't given full clarity, it's invalid. And as for the property, your deed is untouched. It's yours until you decide otherwise." Relief washed through me like warm light. Mine, still mine. But it wasn't enough to know. I wanted them to know. Back at the nursing home, I began staging small acts of resistance. When David did visit, I pretended to be confused at first, asking odd questions about bills or the weather. He sighed, frustrated, believing I was slipping further. Then, when he pulled out papers, I would suddenly grow sharp, asking precise questions, pointing to lines he didn't expect me to understand. The flicker of unease in his eyes was my victory. "Mom, why are you being difficult?" he snapped once. "Difficult?" I tilted my head. "I raised you alone after your father died. I worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. Difficult would have been leaving you behind. But I didn't. I never did." His face flushed. He shoved the papers back into his folder. "You don't understand, Rebecca and I—" "You and Rebecca want what doesn't belong to you," I interrupted softly. He froze, his mouth opening, then closing. For the first time, he didn't have a response. She laughed. "Good. We want you to stay that way. For now. We've got plans, you see. Long-term ones." "What kind of plans?" I asked, though I already knew. "You'll see," she said sweetly. "Just sign what David brings and you won't have to worry about anything." I smiled into the phone, though she couldn't see it. "Oh, Rebecca, you should worry when I stop signing." There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. She muttered something under her breath and hung up. I wrote the exchange down word for word in my notebook. Agnes and Linda became more involved as my quiet allies. Agnes sat with me during visits, watching David's frustration build, her sharp tongue ready if needed. Linda slipped me copies of visitor logs, documenting every time David came with papers, every time he left angry. "They think you're alone," Linda whispered once. "But you're not." Her words warmed me more than she knew. By spring, Rebecca's mask began to crack. She visited again, unannounced, storming into my room with a forced smile. "Mother," she said loudly, though her eyes were cold, "you really should sign those documents. It'll make everything smoother." I looked up from my knitting. "Smoother for whom?" "For everyone," she snapped. I set the needles aside. "Funny. I thought family meant more than convenience." Her jaw tightened. "You're clinging to a past that's gone. The house is ours now, whether you like it or not." I leaned forward, my eyes steady. "Rebecca, a house doesn't become yours just because you parade through it in heels. Ownership isn't in appearances, it's in ink. And the ink doesn't carry your name." She blanched, her lips trembling. What are you saying?" "I'm saying," I whispered, "that you should be very careful before calling me useless, because you're standing in the shadow of someone you've underestimated." Her composure cracked. She spun on her heel and stormed out, muttering curses. Agnes, watching from the corner, chuckled. I almost pity her. "Don't," I said softly. "She'll need no pity when the trap closes." I began to leave small reminders for them, subtle. acts to shake their confidence. When David brought me papers, I left a legal pamphlet on elder abuse in plain sight. He paled, shoving it into the trash. When Rebecca visited, I casually mentioned the lawyer's name, watching her eyes widen. "He's very kind," I said sweetly. "Very thorough." At night, I dreamt of their faces when they realized the truth. Not nightmares, sweet, slow-burning dreams of justice. May arrived. The nursing home organized a Mother's Day tea. Children brought flowers. Residents' families gathered in the lounge. David came, Rebecca trailing beside him in a tight dress, her smile stretched thin. "Happy Mother's Day," David said stiffly, handing me a bouquet. "Thank you," I said, inhaling the scent. But my eyes were on Rebecca. She leaned close, her voice low and sharp. "Enjoy the flowers while you can. Soon you won't have anything." I smiled faintly. "Oh, Rebecca, I already have everything I need." Her smirk faltered. Later, as they left, I overheard her hissing at David in the parking lot. "She knows something. I can see it. She's playing us." "Don't be ridiculous," David muttered. But the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The cracks widened further that summer. Their finances began to strain. Rebecca flaunted too much, spent too freely. I heard through Harold, who still kept an ear on community gossip, that they had maxed out credit cards, taken out loans, even borrowed against David's salary. Desperation. My favorite weapon. Sure enough, David arrived one sweltering July afternoon, sweat beading on his forehead, his hands shaking as he pulled out papers. "Mom, this is urgent," he said, his voice almost pleading. "We need you to sign. Just one signature, that's all. Please." I studied him, the lines in his face deeper now, the weight on his shoulders crushing him. I placed my hand over his trembling one. "David, my son, I would have given you everything freely if you had asked with love. But you let greed speak louder than love. And now, I must let justice answer." He stared at me, stunned. Then he snatched the papers back and fled, his footsteps echoing angrily down the hall. Linda slipped into the room minutes later, a knowing smile on her face. "You didn't sign." "No," I said softly. "I never will." The stage was set, the notebook was full, the witnesses were ready. The lawyer had the documents prepared. All that was left was to wait. And when autumn came, when the leaves fell once more, David and Rebecca would discover that their empire of arrogance had been built on sand. Because this house they fought over, this house they desecrated, this house they believed already theirs, it was still mine. And soon, they would come to understand that the only role left for them was not as heirs, but as tenants. Tenants to the mother and mother-in-law they had scorned, and I would hold the key. Autumn came again, just as I had promised myself it would. The air grew crisp, the leaves painted the ground in shades of fire, and the year of betrayal turned into a year of reckoning. I was no longer the woman who sat trembling in the nursing home lobby with a suitcase at her feet. I was no longer the mother silently hoping her son would come to his senses. No. I had become something else entirely. I had become patient justice. It began quietly. A phone call from the lawyer. "Everything is in place," he said. "The deed remains solely yours. The power of attorney will be challenged officially this month. And as for your will, it's secure. Your son has no claim." I closed my eyes, relief flooding me. "Thank you," I whispered. But relief wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel the shift, to feel the ground tremble beneath them the way it had trembled beneath me last Christmas. So I waited for the right moment, and it came sooner than I expected. David and Rebecca arrived one blustery October afternoon, their expressions tight, their clothes rumpled. Rebecca looked thinner, her lipstick smudged, her confidence dimmed. David carried yet another folder, but his hands shook as he held it. "Mom," he began, his voice strained. We're in trouble." I folded my knitting calmly. "What kind of trouble?" Rebecca cut in, her voice sharp. "Financial. The renovations cost more than we expected. The loans, well, they're piling up. We just need you to save you," I interrupted softly. Rebecca's jaw tightened. "To help. Your family." I leaned forward, my eyes locking on hers. Family doesn't leave a mother in a nursing home on Christmas. Family doesn't strip a house of its memories. Family doesn't call her baggage or useless or old, David. Swallowed hard. "Mom, please, just sign. If you don't, we could lose everything." A silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally, I smiled faintly. "Good." They both froze. "Good," Rebecca spat. "Yes," I said calmly, "because everything you're about to lose never belonged to you in the first place." They stared at me as though seeing me for the first time. Not a frail old woman, not a burden, but something harder, sharper. I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out a stack of papers, my own folder, thick with evidence. I placed it on the table between us. "This," I said, tapping the cover, "is every word you've spoken to me. Every insult, every visit, every attempt to force my signature, documented, witnessed, prepared." David's face went pale. Rebecca reached for the folder, but I slid it away. "And this," I continued, pulling out another envelope, "is the notice from my lawyer. The power of attorney you tricked me into signing? Challenged, voided. The deed? Untouched. Still mine. Always mine." Rebecca's mouth opened, but no sound came. David's hands trembled. "You thought I was fading," I whispered. "You thought I was too weak, too old, too broken to fight back. But I was waiting. And now the waiting is over." The days that followed were chaos. For them. Court papers arrived at their doorstep. The challenge was official. Their debts, once hidden under Rebecca's smug laughter, became public whispers. Their friends began to drift away. The invitations slowed, the champagne dried up. And me? I waited, patient, certain. The final blow came in November. The lawyer called me in. "It's done," he said. "The deed remains entirely yours. You are the sole owner. And as for your son and daughter-in-law, they have no claim." I felt a weight lift from my chest, one I had carried for too long. "Now," the lawyer added, "about the tenancy papers you requested." I smiled. "Yes, let's finalize those." On a gray afternoon, David and Rebecca came to see me again. They looked broken now, hollow eyes, shoulders slumped, the shine of arrogance gone. "Mom," David said hoarsely, we have nowhere else to go. Please, let us stay, just until we get back on our feet." Rebecca's eyes burned, but even she lowered her head. I studied them for a long moment. My son, the boy I had once rocked to sleep, now a man brought low by greed. My daughter-in-law, the woman who mocked me, now trembling in desperation. Finally, I pulled out the papers my lawyer had prepared. I slid them across the table. David picked them up with shaking hands. His face drained of color as he read. "Tenant. Agreement," I explained calmly. "If you wish to stay in my house, you'll pay rent. To me. Your mother. The woman you abandoned." Rebecca's lips trembled. "You can't." "I can," I said firmly. "And I have." David looked at me, tears brimming in his eyes. "Mom, please." I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "You left me in a nursing home on Christmas. You stripped my life, erased my memories, mocked my worth. And now you will pay, month after month, year after year, just for the privilege of living under the roof I built." Rebecca let out a strangled cry. David bowed his head, silent. I signed the final line with a steady hand. Welcome to tenancy. Peace. Because in the end, they had taken nothing from me. But I had taken everything from them.